great. You can swear.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to have an innovative discussion about how we can move conferencing online and discuss the different ways that communication is evolving in our academic environment. We are very lucky to have an amazing panel today. Jeffrey Rockwell, the director of the Cool Institute for Advanced Study, Christy Schultz from the Faculty of Extension,
And 11 online.
and 11 people are joining us online. Thank you very much for joining us. Carla Peck from the Faculty of Education. And Trevor Chow Fraser is joining us from the Office of Sustainability, the key sponsor of this event. Essentially what I think my part of this is that I've been researching online conferences for the last 3 years. Trying to help centers and institutes evolve in the way they communicate. It led me to explore some of the challenges that we're facing as academic organizations and start discussions both within different departments and across the campus. So Jeffrey is going to give the introductions to the next section.
Thank you, Oliver. So I'm very happy to be able to chair this panel and on a subject that I think is becoming increasingly important at the university as we examine our own practices. And so what I'm going to do is to ask the speakers to talk for 5 to 7 minutes. And then I have some questions, but what I'm hoping is that we'll get questions from the floor. So why don't we begin with Dr. Schultz from Extension.
Oh, not yet.
Soon to be doctor.
But in a few years. Thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey. And first, I'd also like to thank Oliver Rossier for inviting me to participate in this panel today. I believe that he invited me here because of my present day work at the Faculty of Extension, which includes leading our Learning Engagement Office, our team of e-learning specialists and instructional designers. And when called upon by Extension researchers, the LEO team has supported a number of innovative and lower carbon means of disseminating research over the years. And so I have some practitioner-based stories of experiences connected to this work, which may be of some interest and usefulness, I hope, but which I recognize are likely not exactly cutting edge or revolutionary. That said, as I began to think about the question more deeply, the question being, how can we reduce the carbon footprint of our research? I began to see and trace my own experiences with research that uses technology, internet technology in particular, from working at the predecessor of today's Arts Resource Center at the turn of the century, to my own present workplace, and to my own research as a PhD student in the Faculty of Education. So in these introductory remarks today, I want to highlight instances of carbon-reduced and technology-enhanced research and research communication I've supported and experienced over the past 20 years. My intention in doing so is to emphasize that in thinking about communicating research with a reduced footprint, we are building upon existing initiatives and practices, that we're not starting from scratch, and we don't need to invent entirely new wheels. Though, as I'll suggest later, we may benefit from thinking about new ways to properly inflate the tires. Going back in time a little bit, in 1994, Edmonton's Freenet was created by the Edmonton Community Network. My memories of these dial-up days are probably not perfect, but what I remember best about Freenet is that I could search the Edmonton Public Library from my home and reserve books from elsewhere in the city. I no longer had to make 2 trips to the library to first search the catalog and then come back when the books I needed were on site. Even in these first years of the internet, how we behaved, how we moved, how we traveled were being impacted. Fast forward just a bit to 2000 to 2002. At this time, I was primarily involved in developing websites in support of teaching. However, at the time, we were also beginning to develop websites for online-only journals, figuring out ways to leverage, some of you may recall this, Dreamweaver, style sheets and templates to more easily create functional websites that would support research communication. This was a time when research like the Orlando Project, just a few years old at the time, was beginning to harness new technologies, and we began to see humanities scholarship in new lights. But for many of us, using websites to communicate our research was relatively new. So going forward a little bit, from 2002 to 2007, across these years, I worked as a web communication coordinator for what was then external relations here at the University of Alberta. What strikes me as interesting about this time is that video, so not just text and image, was finally becoming more accessible online, especially following 2005 purchase of the 2-year-old MySpace and the launch of YouTube. So YouTube has only been around for 12 years.
Wow.
2008. I joined the Faculty of Extension in 2008 as an instructional designer. The program I was assigned to work on that year was our Occupational Health and Safety program. The goal? To create online access to the program, especially for people from across Alberta, without requiring them to come to Edmonton or one of our 4 other remote sites to learn. The investment was significant, but the rationale was strong. Travel was costly for individuals and the environment, and sometimes travel was impossible for those working in remote locations, those with mobility challenges, and even parents with small children. Online learning helped address these challenges. So connected to our topic today, I see a parallel opportunity to address these same challenges when thinking about the research conference. 2009, a year later, I participated in my first fully online conference, the Canadian Blackboard Users Group Virtual Conference, which took place on February 29th, 2009. It was also known as CanBug, Blackboard Users Group for the bug, and had a neat little ladybug as its logo. It was an easy way to search and find the date, the ladybug logo, actually. It was very much a distributed and coordinated set of webinars from across Canada, and featuring presentations from researchers and practitioners in online learning. Since then, though, I've observed that some conferences, especially online conferences, online conferences about online learning, do take place in virtual spaces. For instance, I'm aware of Athabasca University's recent OpenCon, a conference about open educational resources, which took place just this past January. But I've also observed that most conferences do take place in person, with perhaps an occasional keynote being made accessible remotely through tools like Livestream. Perhaps surprisingly, this is also true of many, if not most, e-learning research conferences as well. I think this is at least partly the case because, first, many people enjoy to travel. And second, connecting and networking with people in person is different and a different experience than connecting online. Even room-to-room video conferencing that some of you may have experienced is not yet equivalent to being in the same room with other people. So I think we are still encountering both social and technological barriers to a degree. Still, I think we can build on the work that we've done so far, the technologies we have and which are emerging. We can inflate the tires of the wheels we have rather than reinventing them. So as we move to the open conversation today, I'm thinking about the success we've already experienced using 3 tools in particular. 1, live broadcast webinars, like this one. In other words, we can think about the ways in which we can be both face-to-face in this room and online when possible, thereby creating access, choice, and reducing carbon footprints. 2, online communities. That is, we can think about ways to create community at a distance, in advance and after research communication conference events, thereby helping researchers experience connection and networking at a distance. And 3, maybe, just maybe, if we were thinking globally, or perhaps nationally, and we didn't mind a bit of an unusual sleep schedule for a few days, perhaps we could leverage research networks and universities, especially those with robust e-learning infrastructure, to create multi-site conferences so individuals could travel fewer kilometers and still present their work globally or nationally. A partway approach, I know, but one that may have some appeal. Thanks.
Excellent.
Thank you. Next, I would like to call on Dr. Peck from the Faculty of Education. please.
Great, thanks. Thanks everybody for coming, and welcome to everybody who has joined us online as well. I think that I came to the online world and communicating my research virtually and in online environments much more accidentally than our first presenter. And part of that is because you know, I like to sort of tinker and play around with technology, and so I would experiment with different forms, you know, without anybody sort of making me do it, or, you know, so I would maybe experiment with blog posts, or I joined Twitter a little while ago and have been figuring out how to use that. But another big push that became sort of an accidental reason why I sort of discovered and embracing the potential for communicating our research online is because in our faculty we have developed an online Masters of Education program, which has really caused me to rethink how do I teach, especially because I do think of myself as somebody who really enjoys that face-to-face presence and seeing people nod their heads, you know, as I'm talking or as other people in the room are talking. How do you recreate that kind of environment in an online setting that is still stimulating, challenging, but also still has the sense of community that is perhaps easier to create in a face-to-face setting? And so those are sort of the accidental ways that I ended up working a fair bit online. And so I thought I would just share a couple of those scenarios with you and how I've discovered the potential of these, the different ways that I've been working in an online space to communicate research, but also learn from the research of others. And so the first one that I thought I would talk about is Twitter. I'm fairly new to Twitter. I've been, I'd say, the last 3 or 4 years. The first time I joined Twitter, I played around a little bit and then quickly deactivated my account because I couldn't figure it out, right? I couldn't figure out how does this work. I seemed to be bombarded with a lot of information and couldn't seem to figure out how to find the information that I was most interested in. But then I thought, okay, I read up on a few different folks who are very high profile on Twitter who took time to actually write about how they use Twitter to communicate their research and the different ways that they do that. And I don't know if you'll remember, but several years ago, there was a photo that went viral on Twitter and then out into the rest of the world through various platforms of a cat's paw prints on an old manuscript. And this is Eric Quackel, who's a researcher in Europe who researches old manuscripts. And I'm really simplifying what he does, but and so this was, and I thought, wow, what an incredible example of how he was really thoughtful and has been really thoughtful about how he can communicate. He thinks about what are the images that are going to catch people's eye, what are the little taglines that are going to catch people's attention, and then pull people into his research using those fairly simple but very thoughtfully used tools. And so he wrote a short post on how he used Twitter to do these sorts of things. And I read a couple of other folks who offered similar suggestions, and so I rejoined Twitter. And I have found it to be an incredibly beneficial tool, not only for communicating my own research, but also for learning a great deal from others. And I think one of the best things that you can do on Twitter is, or any social media platform for that matter, is get out of your bubble and follow people who maybe present contrasting views to yours, and that's the beauty of social media, is that it is so accessible, is that you can basically follow whoever you want. And through doing so, you sort of open yourself up to ideas that you may not encounter otherwise. Another way that I've used Twitter as a platform for my research is I'm involved in the Alberta Social Studies curriculum rewrite, which has gotten a lot of press in the last number of months. some very controversial press, and including politicians who are sort of attacking the process and that sort of thing. And because I'm an insider to that process, I thought I'm going to try and set the narrative of what's going on and correct some of the myths that are out there. And so I've used Twitter as a platform that way as well, to sort of communicate that insider's perspective on a particular project that I'm involved in. Something really innovative that I saw last year is an organization called Active History, partnered with a couple of other organizations, and used Twitter to have the first ever, in Canada anyway, Twitter conference, where an entire conference was held over 2 days on Twitter, August 24th to 25th. And they had a call for papers, just like any other conference, that they had to be vetted and reviewed, and they were accepted into the conference. And then they provided tips and strategies for people and guidelines for how the conference would proceed. And basically, it was very similar to an in-person academic conference. Presenters had 15 minutes. In fact, that's more time than I ever have gotten at AERA, for example, the American Educational Research Association. Sometimes I get 12 minutes there. So presenters had 15 minutes to use 12 to 15 tweets to communicate their research. And this was when Twitter was still 140 characters. And you could use a combination of text and image. You could put up a PowerPoint slide if you wanted to as your tweet, or you could just use text. And then that 15-minute period was followed by 15 minutes of questions and discussion on that presentation. And they used, of course, a hashtag Beyond 150 as a way to keep all of the tweets easily searchable and located in one sort of thread. So that, I think, was a really innovative way to use a platform, Twitter, that has now become ubiquitous, but to achieve the same kind of goals, but with zero carbon footprint, right? So I thought that was pretty cool. I didn't present in that, but as a participant, I followed it, and I found it highly engaging and stimulating. The other thing that I thought I would just share briefly is about my experience teaching online. And the reason I thought I would share this is because I think that there are things that we can do that we would use in a pedagogically rich way in a classroom that you could use in a conference type of setting. And so the two things that I thought I would focus on is, one, the importance of building community, and two, the importance of building in interactivity into it, so that it's not just sort of one-way direction, but there's the ability for interchange. I think that whether it's in a classroom or in a conference, people go to conferences, I think, because of the community, right? People talk all the time about the networking, in the breaks is often the richest part, right? The presentations, yes, they're interesting. I can ask for that person's paper, but it's at the coffee time or getting a beer afterwards or whatever, where the richness, people feel that excitement and they haven't seen each other for a year. And so how can we create that online? One of the things that I do in my classes in my online classes, is I ask everybody to create an introductory video so that we can actually see and hear the person that we will eventually be communicating with online through more text-based media. And I just keep it very short, a 1 to 2 minute video, and I give some guidelines about, the kinds of things you might say about yourself as a way to introduce yourself. And I have found that not only as the teacher who misses that face-to-face interaction, but also the students have felt that they really have benefited from that. I also, by the way, offer people that opportunity at the end of the course to be able to say goodbye to one another and to thank people for, how you've contributed to my learning or what have you. And so I don't see any reason why we couldn't do that in an online conference, and I'm sure lots of conferences do that in online settings anyway. But it's the importance of building that community. The other thing that I do is I make a point of acknowledging when we're entering into difficult or tension kind of topics that might cause tension, or I teach a lot of classes on social justice, uncovering the historical and societal constructions of race and ethnicity and class and gender and so on. And these can be very tough topics to try and uncover. And I was actually really, really nervous about engaging in this in an online forum, because I thought that I had to be able to see people to have these conversations. I thought I needed to be able to, and that we needed to be able to see each other. What I've learned from my students is that they actually really appreciate that online space that gives them time to think and respond to other people's comments. Because in a face-to-face setting, I know I take lots of time to process things, and by the time I've thought about what I want to say, the class maybe is over. But in an online setting, it gives people that time. I always remind people, think about pause and why are you having a reaction to something before you respond. It gives people that time. It also gives people time to go back to a reading or go back to, do more research or whatever. And so I've learned that from my students, that online space can actually be a place that cultivates deeper understandings because of that ability to pause and reflect. The other thing that I try and do to build community is to find ways that we can work together and build towards something, not only shared understandings, but also something that students and conference goers can take away from the conference. And I don't mean just a conference paper or something like that. So for example, I have a Google spreadsheet that I put up in every one of my classes, and I call it just a collaborative resource database. And because I say to my students, once you start thinking about race, ethnicity, class, gender, ability, you don't see the world in the same way, right? You start to see things in the press and all over. And so this spreadsheet is a place where people can put the things that they're starting to see, news articles or tips for how to handle this in the classroom or whatever it might be. And so that's something that students can actually take away. So it's the idea of building towards something that they're working on together. I do think that as the moderator, your presence is necessary in some way, shape, or form. For a couple of reasons. Number one, to make sure that people know that you're still there. You haven't just pressed, play or go on the conference and walked away. That you're invested in it too. But also, in case something does sort of go a little bit off the rails, then there's a way to bring it back. And you have to think about how will you bring it back if something goes a bit off the rails. I can say a bit more about community later if there are questions. The last thing that I'll speak about is about interaction, the importance of, again, thinking about more than just, here's my information, I've got your information, okay, now what do we do? How can we build interactive elements into our online environments? I think variety is really important. And there are literally hundreds of Web 2.0 tools that will allow you to build interactivity into your online spaces. Everybody knows Twitter and Facebook. Those are sort of the very well-known Web 2.0 tools. So Web 1.0 is information going one way. Web 2.0 is that it can be interactive, right? But there are all kinds of other tools out there. Google Forms and surveys to do a poll at the beginning of a conference. What's everybody think about this? Boom, and then you share the results. And then maybe do it again at the end. How have people's thinking changed? There's animation tools, cartoon making tools, Poll Everywhere, that you can do a whole range of live polls where people, just like Reddit, can vote things up or vote things down. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of these out there, and they're all pretty easy to use. Like I said, I'm kind of a tinkerer. I haven't taken courses on these, but I learned to play around with them. And if I can do it, pretty much anyone can do it. So I would say, find out what those kinds of tools are that are out there and figure out how you might leverage them to create that interactive space that won't exactly mimic something online, but will build that interactivity more than, here's my slides, I've got yours, thanks. So, thanks.
Our next speaker is Trevor Chow-Fraser from the Office of Sustainability.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Trevor Chow-Fraser. I'm a project planner in the Office of Sustainability here at the University of Alberta. Happy to be speaking on this panel with such cool projects going. So at the Office of Sustainability, we're always looking for innovations by support staff, as well as students and researchers, so that we can share these success stories with the community and use them to try to spark further innovation at the University of Alberta. So that's what brought me to Around the World back in 2014-2015. So Around the World is the 24-hour live-streamed e-conference that the KIASualberta Institute for Advanced Studies runs every year. What KIAS is doing with that project, it excites me personally because it has the potential to stimulate really high impact action against climate change. But it's also about growing a richer, more diverse conversation. It's about increasing equity and bringing in voices that we wouldn't hear otherwise. And it's about using technology to reimagine ways of doing scholarly work. So it's green, but it's also just really exciting. In 2015, I spoke with Jeffrey Rockwell and Claire Peters, who is currently doing our tech. Great job. Thank you, Claire. So we talked to Claire about how to run an e-conference, and I wrote an article that has some tips and tricks in there. Then last summer, Oliver and I met to discuss new ways that we could showcase the e-conferencing expertise that the University of Alberta has been honing over the last half decade, or more, and more, because I don't know. So I wanted to take that article and go deeper to make something that a graduate student or a faculty member could pick up, and it could enable them to start planning their first e-conference right away. So that's what we've got here, just finished hours ago. Hot off the presses. It's also online. I'll tell you how to get that in a few minutes. So this guide, Moving Ideas Without Moving People, it compiles best practices developed over 5 years of running around the world. And we've also looked at projects initiated at Tufts University and UC Santa Barbara to bring in some of their best practices for how to do an e-conference. So if you're at the University of Alberta, I'm hoping you can use this to do a few things. First, it will help you build a case for e-conferencing. So in the opening section, you'll start by understanding the carbon footprint of air travel and also the importance of air travel at different stages of the academic career. So then you can make a case to your director or chair or dean on how e-conferencing can meaningfully contribute to scholarship while also reducing air travel. Also, what I think is probably most important is the technical setup. So that can be very intimidating if you have no idea how to do an e-conference. So we've broken down the setup so you know that you're getting the right equipment and you're getting the right configuration. And most importantly, we'll help you think about how to have backup plans in place based on tried and tested approaches from around the world. And then what we were just kind of talking about is how to maximize interaction in a community. So we can have the technical aspects, but how do we also make this a rich and a rewarding experience? Because e-conferencing is new, we have the opportunity to be very intentional and experimental about how we get people to interact. I do think it can be just as rich and rewarding as an in-person conference, but a lot depends on the purpose of the gathering and how it's been prepared. So we'll help you understand the limitations and the opportunities to make sure you get the best engagement possible. And we'll highlight some of the tools available at the University of Alberta using our Google tools for how to do that. And the last part is about accessing funding and tech support. So this guide includes information on funding, pockets you can access at the university, as well as people you can ask for technical support. And this is something that we'll be updating as we continue to learn more about who at the university has that expertise. So you can download this toolkit if you go to uab.ca/sustain, and then we have a nice web page up under resources. You just look for e-conferencing under resources. So I'm happy to answer more questions later. And
Great.
I
And
hope everyone.
I will post the link on the live stream where we now have 16 people watching. And we have a question when we're ready.
So, well, first of all,
Thank you.
congratulations. So I'm going to start with questions, but I'm hoping that people will send questions in online. I think Oliver is tracking that, so he'll just nudge me and I can read the questions out, or questions from our audience here. But I want to start, yes?
I just want to say we just figured this out. Like literally, we didn't know that it would work. And so honestly, we're trying out something that we hadn't tried before. So we're trying the live questions, live streaming. This should be old news, right? But it isn't. We're just testing it. And someone online, Robert Summers, helped us figure out how to get the chat working. So literally, we had a help desk from someone else who was watching and helping us. So thank you. And the next question.
So we usually try to make it appear that we know what we're doing.
Oh yes. What's the risk of failure on digital? Like, where's our risk of failure? Sorry.
So I want to talk about the problem of lock-in or carbon lock-in, and I want to ask our speakers about this. My understanding is that in many cases certain practices and habits we're locked into habits of doing things certain ways. Some of that lock-in can be due to an investment in infrastructure. The University of Alberta owns a certain number of older houses. Those houses are not very efficient. The costs of replacing those houses, which can be departmental offices and so on, is high, not just houses, but building. But some of the lock-in can be habits where it's not infrastructure. And I think in the case of conferences, the lock-in is academic practice. I know in my case, when I think about cutting flying, I had this sort of anxiety attack about not being able to give invited talks or not being able to go to conferences. And I realized that some of my academic reputation is based on being invited to fly places or being able to meet people and being part of a certain community that meets at these annual conferences and so on like that. So in some sense, I am locked in. So I'd like to get your sense of lock-in and how we can perhaps help academics with their concerns about the loss of face-to-face networking that might come with a greater use of e-conferences over face-to-face conferences. Don't all reply at once. Perhaps, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, the thing that comes to mind most immediately is connected to faculty evaluation or graduate student experiences in applying for fellowships and scholarships. And I think that one of the pieces of the lock-in puzzle is connected to valuing online conferences as much as we value face-to-face conferences. In the same way, perhaps, that we value open journals, I would say now, as much as we value non-open journals. I don't know that we refer to non-open journals and open journals in that way. So I think some of that will come from experience and leadership. So good examples by those with reputations that can sort of lead the way. I think that's part of it.
And at least in the area of climate change, we are seeing a number of scientists are actually declaring that they will not fly to conferences. So we're seeing climate change and leadership in some disciplines.
And I think if we see that from scholars who have the reputation for that reduces their risk from a reputational perspective, that we'll be able to see that flow to graduate students and to universities and early career professors as well.
I I appreciate the question a lot because it causes me to reflect, right? I love to travel, right? And that's part of who I am. And so, but there is that ethical question of, okay, well, what is the cost of my travel, to the environment and so on. Never mind to if an organization is paying or what have you. And so I do think, exactly as you've said, that it requires a paradigm shift in terms of what's valued and a realization that the same goals of a face-to-face conference can actually be achieved online. And in fact, in an online environment, I'd be curious to know, for example, where our viewers are from, the people who have joined us online. In an online conference, you literally can reach people around the world, right? Whereas, and so you can make arguments to department chairs, the faculty evaluation committees, that your reach is actually far more than if you were to go to Minneapolis, for example. I don't know why I put Minneapolis out of my head, but anyway. If you're going to one location for a conference, that your reach is actually has the potential to be global. And so I do think it does require that paradigm shift and understanding how the reach is expanded in an online context, but also helping shift what's valued in terms of the kind of academic participation that we expect of ourselves and of one another when we're going up for evaluation or when we're thinking about how do we build our careers. I also think online interaction and conferences are far more equitable when it comes to graduate students in terms of just accessibility, because they're darn expensive to go to. Once you buy flights and hotels and all that sort of thing, and then you add in the expense to the environment on top of that, and a lot of conferences are just frankly out of reach for graduate students or new scholars who are just sort of, maybe they don't have much research funding to help go to conferences. And so that's also why I think, again, shifting that conversation and really focusing on the benefits and providing good exemplars for people that show them this is the potential, this is what I'm talking about for an online space. And this is how it can be powerful. So those exemplars of really powerful conference spaces that are happening online, I think can help change people's minds as well, potentially.
Can I just make a comment on that? Currently, when you look for conference spaces, so you're a graduate student or an early researcher or any researcher, there's no physical space known as online. You can find spaces in North America, South America, Europe, Canada, Alberta, blah, 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 blah. But there's not actually, we don't even define it as a space to share research knowledge. So, how are we going to progress in terms of celebrating and supporting online conferences when you can't even find them? And we have a question online and we have a question right here.
Oh, I don't have a question, I just have a follow-up comment, because I've had a few conversations with Jeffrey around these kinds of things, so I've thought a bit about this and about what you achieve in a face-to-face conference or workshop and what you don't. And I think also I'd like people to think about how it might meaningfully change our relationships here face-to-face. So right now you have to travel away to be recognized, oftentimes people in your own department won't really know what you research, and then you go elsewhere in your community, right, your scholarly community then acknowledges the kind of work that you do. So as we move to less carbon-intensive lives, I'd like us to think about how that reshapes the shape of our everyday here and how we create that community here. Because, for example, if you host a conference here and a lot of people are local, I just had this experience, the local people don't really engage in the conference in the same way because they have their lives here. So how do we create those spaces for engagement in the neoliberal university where we're all running helter-skelter all the time, right? So, not traveling is one thing, and then reshaping the university in a lower carbon, meaningful way here would be the flip side of that, right?
I think this is actually a very important point. And when I attend an online conference, I typically do all sorts of other things at the same time. when I attend, and in fact, you organized a full day retreat, and then somebody, somebody will sort of book a meeting or something like that, and I just assume if it's here or if it's online that yes, I can sort of duck out and do this. Instead of doing what I probably should do, which is to block it out and say, no, I'm at the conference, I'm not here. And I've got to say, one of the reasons I like traveling to conferences is that airplane flight is a time to read. It seems to be the last sort of extended period of time in which I can read and write and do nothing. Are there other questions from our local or online audience?
We do have another question, which is, we're witnessing the growing movement against the use of digital media. How do you deal with situations where some members of your team have a fear of digital media? So, and this is, I mean, one of the reasons that we invited, especially Carla and Christy, is that you are tinkerers, and you know, in the adoption curve of technology, you're playing, and there's other members here that are essentially playing with technology. But how do you deal with a team member who is scared, essentially, of the technology and nervous about using it in their academic setting?
So I'm happy to jump in there. I think there are some, legitimate fears, things that have been in the media the last couple of days.
Yeah. For example.
But also some fears that have to do with experience and skill and time and learning.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to take up the question from that perspective.
Excellent.
And I'm thinking about faculty members, researchers who I've worked with from, my very first days in the what was then the Arts Technologies for Learning Center. And, part of that work was helping people to learn how to print. At the time, that was, maybe that was scary too. The technologies that we're talking about today are often the range of Web 2.0 tools, YouTube, Twitter, cell phone voting, Google Docs, a full range of video conference opportunities. And I think that there is the opportunity to recognize that these are not tools that we are born knowing how to use. And I think that it's really fair to recognize that in ourselves and others, that there are things to be learned, and I think we do need to create spaces for that learning, especially within a learning institution like this. I'll mention and give sort of a hat tip to a project that I'm familiar with out of the Center for Global Citizenship Education and Research at the Faculty of Education. They've been working on a few international projects with youth, including national and international youth white papers on global citizenship.
Nice.
And one of their strategies that really struck me as I was looking at their work was that they took the time to train youth from around the world to use the range of Web 2.0 tools for collaboration. So even when they were talking to people who were, for the most part, teenagers and in high school, they didn't assume that there would be an innate knowledge of how to use these tools.
Right.
And I think that's important. And in my world in continuing professional education at the Faculty of Extension, I'm often asked to talk about how skill development happens over a lifetime. And I look at the internet technologies we have now, and these were not available when I was an undergraduate student. I've had to learn these along the way too, and I think that we all have that capacity, and we can create those opportunities for learning. So if it's about legitimate fears from the media, I'm not sure that I have a great response, but if it is about creating an environment to learn, I think that's what we need to be able to do within a university context.
So Trevor, perhaps you could talk a little bit about how this pamphlet tries to address, the booklet tries to address some of these issues about the technology.
Yeah, I think when I've talked about e-conferencing with friends in academia and over the years, and I think that what you're pointing to is that these tools are very open and the barrier to entry is very low. And so that's amazing, but it also means that there's the assumption that you can just use it with no training. And whenever I talked about e-conferencing with colleagues, the first thing they would think of is this terrible Skype conference that they had with someone, and it was like someone giving a talk in their kitchen, and they cut out halfway through. So there's definitely reason to be apprehensive if that's your first experience of e-conferencing. But I come from a background in community radio, and then community radio has become, a lot about podcasting in the last few years. And podcasting is the same thing. It's really low barrier to entry, and so you'll have podcasts that are just, people recording on their iPhone, and it's just conversation, and that can be great. But I think a little bit of training can help you add a bit of polish. It can make the audio quality better. It doesn't take a lot of training. It's the kind of thing that you can pick up at a community radio station with a few hours, a workshop of a few hours. And it can really change it from something that feels not integral to your career to something that feels like this is something I want to showcase. It's not just a conversation on Skype, it's like a podcast or it's a video that I'm going to put on my CV, and it becomes a more integral part of your career. So that's what I'm interested in doing with this toolkit, is giving people some of these tools. Hopefully in here there's enough that you could get going, but also to get you in touch with the right people who can then give you that polish and make it feel like a very professional part of your career.
Can you just add to that, so the KIAS Around the World conference that we've run 5 years, there's an archive with all the YouTube videos, and I mean, frankly, we were hacking from the very beginning. The first one we ran, we tricked our technicians into thinking it would be easy to do. And then literally we tried to stream in 2-hour blocks around the world. It was incredibly hard, and we dealt with Skype, we dealt failing and starting. We tried to switch over to a better platform called Livestream, and we've got ClearC or Livestream and Lifesize, thank you. And these organizations themselves get bought out or changed. We were using Storify to capture all our Twitter feeds, turning it into magazines. Now Storify is gone, it's about to disappear. So we may teach each other a tool or a technique, and then we also have to learn the next one, and also sort of be each other's safe guides.
Yeah, I think this, connecting to the question that was just asked, I think that when things work well, they look like they're easy, but the behind the scenes is not necessarily as easy as it looks. And my experience in ed technology over the years has been that something will always go wrong. And maybe we should make those experiences visible too, so that they can be less terrifying.
Today I spent 10 minutes, and I apologize, but 10 minutes trying to get the URL to post on the YouTube feed. It's blocked, so you can't put a URL in the comments section of a YouTube stream. I probably would have known that if I would have tried before. But I just wanted to get back to what's come up a few times about different layers of career and needs and social presence. Well, the 2 of the most popular videos in our Around the World archive are from graduate students. So they have over 300 views. So these are graduate students who came on in a time where they were about to start job hunting, and there's 300 views. That's fantastic.
I want to say for our colleagues at the University of Alberta, one of the reasons why we've been doing these Around the World conferences is to make sure that we could build up the expertise here at the university so that you can do them. And we've been trying to push, in some sense, the edge of the envelope on longer, more complicated ones, partly so that people want to do a half day, it should be fairly smooth, and trying to make sure that the organizations that we have fabulous support here, make sure that the people that are thinking about the technologies, that they have a good sense also of what it's going to take and what they would sort of charge. So you're not expecting people to work over and above. stay late at night or something like that.
Sorry, do you mind if I just say a couple
Absolutely,
things about the fear question? Because I do think it's a really important one. And I echo everything that's been said about making sure that people have time to learn, and are supported in that. So, why not take the example of an in-person conference where there are often pre-conference workshops on various topics, and have some sort of pre-conference space where anybody who wants, how do you do this? Well, we can all get together and do it. Or maybe there's a webinar that's created that people can do self-paced, prior to the conference, or that sort of thing. I also think having infrastructure at our university is crucial, and that's the great work that you're doing to try and build that capacity. But also things like, Jeffrey, you talked at a previous panel about the fact that there is actually a room in your faculty, a media room, where people can go, and if they're going to be interviewed by the media or engage in these kinds of things. This doesn't exist in the Faculty of Education. So if I want to do something online, I'm in my office, which is fine, I can close my door, but what if a few of us want to be together? Right? We don't actually have a space for that. We have to try and find it. And what's nice about having a dedicated space, you can have the University of Alberta backdrop if you want. You could have your microphones, your tech there, that would be there to support you. And to have that tech support before, during, and after, as well, is, I think, really important. The other thing is, the other aspect of fear is people wanting to control their image or their profile of what's actually out there about them online, but also the fear of attacks from, trolls and this sort of thing. And so I think for any kind of online conference, there will need to be policies for how do you handle this, right? Where do we, policies and protocols, where do we agree things will be posted? And that we all sign up and agree on these sorts of things. And it's not, is it okay for people to put the video out on Twitter or not? Right? Is it going to be confined in a space? And so I don't necessarily have suggestions for what those policies should be, but they should be thought about.
And I was looking at the number of years that the internet's been around, how many years. So 0.01% of human history has been online, approximately. So we're just starting to figure out how to have these conversations. When the printing press came, it took us literally 200 years to figure out how to actually use that properly to communicate various things. And so we're going to learn this. And cognitive presence, so attention versus social presence. And the best kinds of conferences are the hybrid ones. So we have a group here meeting and talking. We have people smiling at us. We know it's interesting to them. And we hope it's also interesting to the people online. And some people are sending smiley faces online and trying to help me hack through these things. So anyway, I think we only have a couple minutes left.
So let's take that question.
Well, if there's an online question.
Okay. Go for it.
And I don't mean this to sound like a suspicious question, but I really, I fall into the camp of having questions about the corporate ownership and control of these technological platforms. So on the one hand, there's the capacity to do something, and on the other hand, there is who is in control of that mode of production and what kind of profitability is involved. So I guess that's the basis for my question, but what I'm really interested in is, for those of you that are already working in these platforms or possibilities, what do you see as the university's role in helping negotiate that? Like if Storify is disappearing, then what? Or is this something that the Office of Sustainability, or I know ARC does all kinds of work, is this kind of the direction that there's going to be a ton of university labor and infrastructure being built around creating non-corporatized or tools that are taking into consideration those kinds of questions, not just things becoming obsolete, but why are they being made and what else are they doing, I guess.
Open access and open education movements are huge.
Right.
And so in a way, they are the countervailing flow of effort and attention. And I was trying to think about how is it that we are in 2018 and conferences are not online? So playing with words like e-conference. But then if you think about it a different way, and Jeffrey and I were chatting about this, but what if TED Talks plus Wikipedia are already some version of e-conferences? So what is the level of corporatization of those? Well, TED Talks has some element, and I don't want to get myself in trouble here. Wikipedia is a different thing. And then there's Mozilla, and there's a bunch of people that are actually smart, interesting groups of people who are trying to solve this problem in groups. Anyone come across any of these open education?
So the University of Alberta actually has an open education initiative and small grants. I think we're in the middle of a competition right now. This is for faculty, and the idea is to encourage faculty to find what is there and to start using it in their courses instead of feeling that they've all got to make it themselves all over again or buy it or something like that. So that's one initiative that's there. Another initiative, U of A, is really one of the leaders in Canada and around digital archiving.
Okay.
And I think this is an advantage that we have, and it doesn't apply only here, that we can deposit, all of us, students and faculty, can get an account on ERA and can deposit materials, and they're designing their infrastructure to last. Now, you have to remember that even though we're a non-for-profit organization, we're still an institution. There still are rules, but I think academic libraries, we have a fairly good sense of how they work as institutions, what biases they might have, and I trust them to preserve data a lot better than companies. We think of Google and Facebook as being, Apple, these companies as being large and immovable, but back in my days, there were companies like DBase, WordPerfect. Everyone thought they were the big guys and they would never disappear. And IT companies can vanish very fast. Who knows, this whole Facebook thing, Facebook may be about to just disappear. So I think for all sorts of reasons, we should be depositing quality, well-documented, and by documentation include metadata, academic materials in the education and research archive at the university.
So unfortunately, we have maybe less.
Well, I think this links back to the question of the legitimacy of e-conferences, right? And for me, your question speaks to intellectual property, right? Who owns this information? And so if we do deposit these in online repositories, that automatically gives something a DOI. And so then we can further legitimize this work by citing it in our work. Right? And so, and then, citate, I mean, not that I don't ever want to go down the road of citation counts. I think that's a very dangerous thing, but we can give even more legitimacy to the work by at least including it in our future work.
Right, and something that lasts.
Exactly.
Like platform.
Yeah, exactly.
So please, let's thank the speakers and our audiences, both face-to-face and online. Thank you very much.
Can I ask another question? Just if you have a second.